So this is going to get us into a little bit of some CCPs. We're going to hit CCPs here in the next couple of slides, and a few more slides. We're going to get into it a lot more, and we're going to need to probably continue on that. It's a big topic. There is no one way of doing casualty collection points. So many variables will dictate what your best option is for that specific incident, like manpower, your threat or threats. Is it an active threat, an unknown threat? Do you have an inside cordon done? What is the nature of the incident? Is it a shooting? Is it an explosive? Is it a combination of the two? What kind of area denial is being put onto you, or are you putting out there towards the threat? What is the size of the structure? Is it 1 story, 2 story? Is there casualties outside and inside, just inside? What kind of secondary CCPs are you going to have, either inside or outside? If inside, maybe you have CCPs on different floors. So we may have casualties on the 2nd floor and the 3rd floor, or the 4th floor, or a mix in between there. So what do we now call those CCPs? How many do we need? Are we using fire department language because we're instituting rescue task force? So are these Division 1, Division 2, Division 3 type of terminology? What is that consistent type verbiage that we're going to use that transcends the discipline that's responding there, whether it's EMS, law enforcement, everybody that's going to be on scene? Do we have rescue task force integration? Because rescue task force is really built around that CCP. And what is our egress or casualty evacuation going to look like from where we choose our CCP? So we're going to hit on CCPs in a few slides, but keep this picture of the stairwell in your head. This is a fairly heavy topic with a lot of different variables. We're currently working on an article with Dr. Kevin Gerald he is the TEMS chair for the NTOA, National Tactical Officers Association. And this is just an operational gap that we found out there from coast to coast. So we're going to be working on the CCP type of methodology, more principles, because we can't dictate, hey, this is going to be definitely the best way to do it every time. That is just unrealistic. So maybe we'll do a podcast with Kevin here in the future when he returns from his overseas trip. It is a heavy topic that deserves quite a bit of consideration at all levels. So when we see evacuation, this is pretty common. This is what we see quite a bit. This is obviously from VT, but if we look at just the manpower requirements of moving these people and what a pain in the butt evacuation can be, moving people, especially if we're doing just these improvised type carries, right? We're just everybody grab an extremity, right? Which you see in the lower right. Very, very common with some of our lighter patients, casualties. We see a couple people carrying 2 up in the upper left picture there. It's manpower extensive, it's bulky, and they're carrying them quite a distance when they're going out of there. So this is what it typically will look like. What we need to do is maybe think about more efficient ways to do that. If we had a rescue task force in this situation, yet they use skeds or Talon litters or something like that, is that really an improvement? I don't know, maybe. I would say no, but it's still going to be difficult. So there's ways to do evacuations that I think are a little bit more surgical, that many rescue task force personnel, who are typically your firefighters, that are going to be already very, very proficient at, because their background in hasty rescue and rapid intervention team type techniques might be a better option for you, not only from the manpower assets, but how tiring it is. Becoming old, I think that forces you into becoming better and more efficient at what you do. So here's a little bit older video we saw on that one of the pictures 2 slides ago with the stairwell CCP. So some of you may recognize where that occurred, because that was off a real world incident. CCP is probably not your best option for stairwells, not your best option for a CCP, especially in certain situations. So in that specific instance, there was a potential for other threats. They had not done clearing on the 1st or 3rd floor. Do I want to put a CCP into a stairwell where, if I have not eliminated or contained all known threats, I'm kind of putting some people out there because of the security posture that would have to be there in place to protect anyone doing treatment, no matter who they are, whether it's your rescue task force or it's law enforcement or whatever. Once you get down and you start focusing in on that patient, we lose SA, we lose situational awareness. So you kind of are leaving yourself open a little bit in that situation. But if we were evacuating through a stairwell, we weren't throwing people out windows, which would be highly advantageous as far as not bringing people back through hallways that potentially still have unknown threats. And if we are using a stairwell, this is just a very, very simple technique that basically requires you to have a 8mm 7.5 bailout rope. Air mid is probably preferred on this. 2 rescuers and a carabiner. And if you want, you can use webbing, but you definitely don't have to have webbing for this technique. There's webbing. There's an XS1 used in this. And this is just a stairwell corkscrew. This technique's been around for ages. There's articles and pictures of folks doing this in the late 80s, probably even earlier, but that's the latest picture I could see. But very, very easy, and there's almost no rigging to it. And so, on a scale 1 to 10 as far as what is your rope rescue rigging requirement for this, how difficult is it? It would be somewhere probably around a 1 out of 10 scale. It's very, very easy to do. Sometimes this may be a good option depending on the layout of the building. Your better option would be having a CCP that has multiple means of egress and being able to do rapid packaging and just lower your casualties out that window very rapidly, so you're not going back through the hallways where potentially secondary clears, maybe in some cases primary clears. You have to have a cordon set up with your law enforcement personnel kind of providing security. It's much more manpower extensive than being able to do your hasty rescues, getting people out and coordinating that response with armored vehicles, patrols, or vehicles of opportunity below that window just to pick and grab and go. Very easy technique for stairwells. So let's take a look at this video real quick. So clip it onto back of webbing. This is an XS1, as we said. You can just do a hasty harness on somebody. First person kind of picks them up. There's a couple different ways you can do this. That's probably a little bit of older technique. And as you go, the guy up top is controlling the descent by wrapping it around the handrail. And now the guy lowering them isn't even holding the patient anymore. It's the guy up top that's holding them through the descent or control device, which we're using as a handrail. And as fast as that guy can run is as fast as you go down the stairs. So very not tiring, very, very quick. So you're looking at about a 27, maybe 28 second time when you're coordinating and you've practiced to get down close to 9 to 10 stories. So what it looks like from there, he's got the ankles and he just runs. Kind of on the outside of the stairwell, just like you're kind of laying hose line through a stairwell, you kind of have it through the outside. That's where your feet are going, and that kind of clears their head from each level. And as fast as you can run, you can get them down. So that's kind of a stairwell option there. Let's talk CCPs. So some may recognize this drawing of a crime scene. If we were to compare this to the stairwell, how could we manage this situation? What's nice about this is we have one door in, which is the upper right, as that's our one entry point into that room. We have a bunch of windows that we've outlined in green. This was one of the actual rooms that an event occurred in. And when we look at this CCP now gives us much more room. The other CCP is going to get crowded very quickly. If you had any more than even 2 casualties in the stairwell, it's just going to be a bad day for you. You are squished up there. And what they also realized is that where that CCP was, that was also the primary means of evacuations. As you got casualties in there, there's people stepping over your casualties, stepping on your medical equipment to even get down those stairs. So if we look at it and kind of a compare contrast on this one, in this situation, we can easily move casualties out a window, which would be preferred for speed and safety. Potentially get access to other adjoining rooms, especially if it's drywall that's separating them. So with a Halligan or really with your foot, you can get through drywall from one room to another, whether it's in a hotel or it's in a classroom that's separated by drywall. And about it's like 6 seconds. You get a layer of drywall on one side, a layer of drywall on the other. Some insulation, maybe some conduit in there, and that's it. So we could actually access multiple rooms all the way up and down that hallway without ever going into the hallway. We could go from room to room to room, and because those other rooms are hopefully on lockdown, we can start evacuating people just through the walls and then at our main evac route, which would be one of those windows. Just knowing a little bit on building construction and taking some of those things from rapid intervention teams, we could come up with probably much more efficient ways of doing things. And even if we put it into a rescue task force, we've talked to a lot of people about different concepts that you can employ based on your assets. But if we look at like a vent enter search type methodology that firefighters use, if we would take that to our rescue task force to where we have a law enforcement officers, they're looking for injured people. They get into this room and then boom, they find 10 injured and however many that are dead, that are angels. Boom, we got 10 people. They can radio out. They can put a mark on that window. That rescue task force can come over, which may be two firemen and 2 cops, 3 firemen, 2 cops, whatever your configuration is, and maybe throw that roof ladder, throw that 24-foot extension ladder. If that window isn't open, then as we throw that ladder, just like in vent enter search, we smash that ladder through the window. First person up may be maybe the cop, right? So he goes in, makes access to the other cop. Rescue task force, close proximity, right behind him on the ladder. Boom, they hop into this room. We have another law enforcement officer, that's our rear security type of thing as we go up there. Get in there, rapid triage, rapid treatment, rapid packaging, and then we start sending them back out that window. That ladder that we have now is a great high anchor. We can slip in a 2-to-1 on that thing very quickly with just our rope and one carabiner. Start putting them straight down. Very, very easy to control. Even worst case scenario, we didn't have that ladder. One guy sitting on his back, clipped in carabiner with a munter hitch on it, lowering that casualty out that window. You're gaining friction not only in your munter hitch, but you're also gaining it on every angle through that window that rope touches. So the first angle inside the windowsill, and then that terminal angle going down the windowsill, that 90-degree angle, it's taken in some cases up to 64% of that weight of that casualty off you, and it's on there. It's just the same thing as your vectors of your change of directions for the rope rescue guys that are out there. There's potentially much more efficient, much quicker ways of doing this. You can't even compare the speed that it takes to start evacuating people out the window using those methods versus packaging someone up on a litter, on a Skedco, carrying them in a 4-person carry, moving through a hallway, finding that stairwell, going down. The amount of manpower that takes, not just for moving them, but from a security posture, is pretty ridiculous. And these are techniques that all your firefighters should know, right? Anybody that's been involved doing RIT and hasty rescue in those type of situations. So it's absolutely lightning fast when you compare it to carrying somebody. Think about different ways of getting people out, and think about the safest ways of getting people out. The other side of what we want to talk about in this picture is the bodies that you see drawn in there in this drawing are those that are deceased. And when you look at some of these AARs, very rarely in these mass shootings, people will go down, check pulses real quick. And in some cases, it's obvious death. But in other cases, we still have people checking those pulses, and they're not consistent with life. They're dead. And they move on to the next, then move on to the next, move on to the next, just searching for somebody that hopefully has a pulse that they can save. And all those people, when you're jumping from one person to another, are typically left that way. So, whether it's under the guise of crime scene preservation or whatever that may be, we're not saying patrol officers should be rolling in with triage tags and going, okay, I'm going to tear the green and yellow and red off and leave a black on there so everybody knows that I checked them. You look at certain things like the Brits will put them on their face down, cross their arms and their legs, and that tells everybody they're angels. That's it. What that does is it avoids continual reevaluation as other teams come through. That you're in chaos at this point. So no one's communicating, going, okay, we have now done an entire triage and evacuation of all casualties in room X, Y, or Z. No need to go in there anymore. A lot of times people are on different comms. There's 20 different agencies there. You're getting federal agencies coming in. People are coming up that route. Now they're going in and they're checking pulses. They don't have to. We mark them somehow. Flipping them on their face, crossing their arms and legs is just a fast way to do that as you go through and evaluate them, to avoid the constant reevaluation. Everybody can look in there, be like, all right, they've already been through here. Move on to the next place. So those outlier skills that we want to hit on before we dive into CCPs real quick is in training, in your pre-planning. Do not assume anything. And assume, if you want to assume everything's going to go wrong. You're not going to have enough manpower. Your fire department's going to be late. Your law enforcement's going to be delayed. Due to weather, we're not able to have helicopters. We'll have no HLZs. Everybody's got to get ground transported out. You're in a rural area. It's going to take a while. There's snow on the road. There's ice on the road. Do not assume that things are ever going to go perfect, that you will have any of the assets that you have, and you've got to reflect that in training just to be able to get timestamps on how long it takes and what the amount of organic assets are that you will need in worst case scenarios. Do not assume that you can get in. So whether we're doing force on force training, think about your agency, think what you're training those patrol guys on, think about the knowledge and education that you're giving brand new officers at your department. Is breaching, is TECC, are those key components part of their initial train up before they're able to get on the road? And we need to think about that. It will be them that'll probably be the first ones on scene at that next event. So they need to have those capabilities. So don't assume that we're going to be able to get in, because in training, it's like, okay, go to the sound of the gun. Roger that. Boom, boom, I hear it. And the door you just open the door up and you're in and you're going. That is not reality. We need to, in your next training, just barricade a door, lock a door, do whatever. And as soon as you have those new guys coming in doing their field training exercise, and they're like, all right, listen to the sound of the gun, move to the sound of the gun, and they hear it, and then they're trying to open that door, just see what the reaction is. Right, see what happens. How do we get casualties out? That's another one, right? A lot of times that's where the scenarios type in. So we're on the second floor, we're on a third floor, wherever. We may have a CCP, we may have a place where that medic is working. Let's say if we're integrating a rescue task force or medical capability inside there, or even if it's just law enforcement or SWAT guys doing it, then it's like, all right, what order are you taking out? Well, he's the most critical, so he's going to be the first one out, and then it's going to be this one, and then this girl. You're like, okay, cool, index. Don't index. With the manpower that you have, with the assets you have, execute that to see how much of a pain in the butt it is removing them and how long it takes. And I think that will really force you into coming up with more efficient, effective ways of doing it. So breaching, rescue. We may have to breach on our way out during evacuation because we may want to go out a different way. Maybe it's just not smart to go back out with casualties the way that we were able to breach in. Have that breaching capability, have that rescue capability, and know your casualty collection point type of dynamics. On this, I also want to say, look at events that have occurred and look at where under stress, right? We don't turn smart, we don't turn brilliant, we turn pretty dumb because we are under stress. We have self-preservation going on. We hear the stress of people screaming and chaos going on in there. Never does that make us smart. So the possibility of officers trying to make breaches, going from door to door, trying to get in there, obviously has happened. That is realistic. It's happened. We've seen this. We've seen the video. We've seen those things go. And while they're going from one door to door, they may be passing a series of windows. We ask ourselves, dude, just break the window, get in. That's what you got to do. But realize under stress, it's not what we're thinking, right? We don't rise to the occasion. We sink to the level of our training. If our training hasn't been get in that building any way you can, including looking for any windows that you can break out or any way into that, they're not going to do it. And that is realistic because we've seen it. So understand any way that you can get in and nail that into people's heads. So as you're passing those windows, realize you can probably break in and get in through that window. CCPs, this is not going to be the all-inclusive end of story, this is what we should do type of thing. This is going to bring up probably more questions than it is answers. And that's probably where you want to be. No one can dictate your CCP policy because no one can dictate the environment, the assets, where even the geographic location is of the next dynamic violent event. But some principles that we need to look at. I was presenting a lecture similar to this one a couple years ago at a special operations medical conference and had a wide range of law enforcement agencies present and figured it'd be a good idea to potentially just throw out a few questions for a very, very non-scientific ad hoc operational gap analysis. So with, I guess, maybe 100 plus different agencies there. I asked them how many agencies in this room use the term CCP within discussions surrounding active shooter incidents. Pretty much everybody raised their hands. So the next follow-up question was how many have a training POI or program of instruction on casualty collection points that is taught to patrol officers? And nobody raised their hand. How many have some kind of written SOP listing some key performance parameters of casualty collection points, whether it's interior or exterior, and the interoperability of other agencies to be able to get in and out of that? No hands. So up until I had the opportunity to study CCPs and the methodology behind it, utilized by folks that actually use them routinely, I really sucked at implementing them. I knew a little bit. I thought I was good, right? So it was one of those fallacies where everything's good until it's not. That was kind of where I was at, and I thought I pretty much understood and realized, no, I didn't, man. There's a lot to these things. When we look at it, that first question is what? What is a CCP? So we hear the term thrown around all the time, but what the hell is it? Who teaches it in detail? Or at least who sets up some of the considerations? So when we look at CCP, there's a bunch of different kinds. And just as a broad overview, things that you'll hear out there with people that use them quite a bit are hasty CCPs, which are those CCPs that you create on the fly. Something just went down, or you just made access and there's no gunshots going on, but you got injured people. Some event just occurred. And it's just a quick organization, like, you guys sit over here, drag them over this way. Let's get this thing figured out. We're probably going to move them to another better location, but it's just a hasty, very quick organization. Get them out of this area. Maybe somebody else will be behind us to even control that as we push forward. So that hasty CCP is one of those things that you hear quite a bit. Next would be a kind of a floating CCP, which may mean that it's very dynamic in nature, and there's two folds to this. So it may be dynamic in nature in that as you're kind of going with casualties, you're having to move them en route. So you're potentially moving with the force or your security posture in a specific direction as you move. So we may have word that there's 10 injured in a room down the hallway a little bit. We just came up, we just found 2. Do we want 2 CCPs? No, I'm going to take these 2 people and put them where the 10 people are. So we may have a floating or dynamic type of CCP. On the other side, we should probably always have the ability to turn even a static CCP into a dynamic CCP. And what I mean by that is patrol may have found that room where there's a bunch of injured, drug a couple other people in there, and now you're the rescue task force coming into that situation, or you're the medic assigned with law enforcement, or you're the paramedic law enforcement officer. Now you're going to work in that CCP in that room that they found, like the room that we just looked at. And about 5 minutes into you trying to get your head above water, another guy comes in and says, hey, listen, just FYI, we got EOD coming up. There's a backpack right outside this door with some wire, suspicious. Okay, so we may now take that static CCP and move that into a dynamic. And this is another reason why it's a great methodology to potentially choose a CCP, at least in the instances that we have discussed. It may have another means of egress, which may be that window. Because do I want to start loading those people up to evac because we have a potential bomb and a backpack outside? Do I want to start loading them and our egress or evacuation is going right next to that bomb because we only have one way in, one way out of that? Now I'm going back into even a more dangerous situation versus, hey, break that window, grab me that rope, and we're going to start lowering people real quick and get out of here ourselves. That's the kind of that floating or dynamic nature, is moving from one area to another. Then there's your deliberate, right? Deliberate CCPs, which is, hey, we're hitting this location tomorrow, right? So maybe a high-risk warrant or even en route, we're responding to the Aurora Theater. And somebody at some point, behind those initial units is pulling up a map going, here's what we got. We're going to call our initial CCP, we're going to have a deliberate CCP, which is going to be the corner of side A and B or wherever in the parking lot adjacent to wherever that incident is. No matter what, we know where our initial deliberate one is. If we're looking at that house that we're hitting tomorrow, we need a CCP someplace that's out of the line of fire if something goes awry on our approach or during the breach or anything like that. So we're going to designate a CCP here and a CCP here, and it's kind of dependent on where we potentially take gunfire or take casualties from. And those will be where we're starting off from. So at least everybody's on the same page and we know what's going on. And in the end, we may have these CCPs set up outside if we're responding to that theater shooting. Yet, once guys get inside, they may have to create interior CCPs also. So there may be a phase 2 CCP. So once they get them in here, they start moving them out to the outside ones, bringing out, and it's kind of this fire brigade, with casualties, though, bringing them from inside to out. So you may end up being dynamic and have multiple sets of CCPs, but that deliberate is ones that we point out and say, hey, this is what we got right now. Everybody on the same page. Let's do that. So when we look at who sets up that CCP, that's a great one, because in the cases that we discussed, and really almost any interior casualty collection point, it's going to be law enforcement. It's going to be whoever is in there, your patrol officers, potentially your SWAT guys because they're not a full-time team, etc. So the question then becomes, if it is those patrol officers, are we getting the key performance parameters of a casualty collection point taught to law enforcement effectively? And by that, there's certain things that people that provide the medical care that may be interacting in a CCP, there's certain things they really would want. One, I'd really want ease of evacuation. I'd want multiple means of egress. I would want it easy to be secured by my law enforcement security posture. There's a lot of those things. So are we getting those key performance parameters? You're never going to find all of them. But at least if we had the guys' information on what to look for, they're going to make a better informed decision on what makes an effective CCP. We need to think about that. We need to think about getting together and getting those key performance parameters out there so that can then be taught to those officers so they know what to look for and what makes a great CCP. Where we kind of started hitting on this a little bit. Where should they be? If interior or even exterior, what are some principles in selecting them? How many do you need? What are some simple considerations? There'll never be a perfect location for every event because of the variables of threat issues and building construction and all that kind of stuff. But what should those universal considerations be? One, I think we should think about ease of providing security posture with the least amount of law enforcement, because we want to push those assets out to primary, secondary clearing and other tactical considerations. So ease of providing security, ease of egress to evacuation is a big one. An interior, having a window access is phenomenal, especially on a multi-story is pretty much what we're mainly talking about on there. But having that second, third story, making sure, if we can have a window access, that would be outstanding. If it's outside, some natural choke points need to be considered. Safety is one of those things. And what I mean by safety is we're going into a relatively unsafe type of environment. So a lot of those things that civilian paramedics and EMTs have learned, like, is my scene secure? Do I see, smell, or hear any possible hazards myself, my crew, or my patients? That's a little bit out the window on this one, although we do have a good security posture, hopefully, put in place by the TTPs that we have in place with law enforcement. But safety, what I mean on this is, let's say we had the Boston incident and they used high explosives where we had structural issues against those buildings. When people are doing these hasty rescues and they're dragging them out to where they think the CCP is, or even if we have a partial collapse and you have access to a couple people that you're able to get out of some rubble and move them out. We see this a lot of times, especially in training, is they may move them outside the door. They may move them just outside the rubble pile, and boom, that's where we're stacking people. And all of a sudden, that's where medical people are rolling in and start treating them. But are we thinking about a secondary collapse? Are we in an area where, they drug them 10 feet out of an area that just took a hit from explosives, yet if that secondary collapse does occur, then we're getting collapsed on. What is that location? What is that distance from that type of safety needs to be considered? So explosive secondary collapses, even just dragging them outside the door may not be the best option, because whoever's doing that medical will potentially get some blinders on them and lose some SA. So we want to think about getting that. We're going to have to move them a little bit further in some cases. So that's something internally that you'll need to work out. So when is another consideration, and that's also a very dynamic thought process. So I can tell you the earlier the better, but when is going to be based on the threat. It's going to be based on your assets. It's going to be based on so many variables. But as early as you can create that first CCP, if you've got casualties in that place, and start organizing them and getting them evacuated, is obviously going to be the best thing for them. So as early as possible in that situation, but you can't assign it to the third group that goes in, you will be CCP. You can't do that. It's a very dynamic thought process, right? This isn't evidence-based medicine. This is HRO type stuff. You're dealing with outliers, and you're going to make the best out of what you're given. And if that's a crap sandwich, then that's pretty much what you got. So as far as when, you really can't put a time stamp on that thing. You just know that we need to do it early. We need to do it quick. And how we do it is pretty much, the answer is based on the culmination of the previous what, who, where, when, is how we're going to execute that. And like I said before, it's going to be different for everybody, because everybody's got different organic assets, different capabilities, different manpower and personnel type issues as far as on-scene times and how long it takes to respond, etc. One last thing I want to hit on is a concept called tachyvac inertia. It seems to have come to us from Florida and has somehow found its way into CCP conversations here and there in the Southeast. It basically stated CCPs not being a good idea because it causes a delay in your evacuation. And then that same person out of Florida came up with some bogus number, like it delayed evacuation 13 minutes. And that makes it almost sound like he studied it. He didn't study any of this, because there is not one flipping incident that we can point to that has ever occurred in real life where you can extract the data points that he utilized. It's crazy. So what's interesting about this is you have a CCP because you have to get rapid treatment done, see what you have as far as casualties, injuries, and then allocate evacuation assets to that. And you're just trying to get your head above water, trying to gain some essay on the situation you have of casualties. There's a bunch of other crap going around. So it's not like we have this unlimited evacuation capability moving with us throughout this incident, where as we come up, we see somebody on the left, litter team, come up, grab that guy, get him out of here. There's a casualty on the right. There's 4 in this classroom. I need 4 litter teams. Up, get them out of here. Are you freaking kidding me? I mean, holy crap. The whole idea of don't set up a CCP because it can delay your evac. The reason we have a CCP is because we've already become overwhelmed and we are dealing with ambiguity. We don't know how many other casualties we have. We have a limited amount of organic assets, medical assets, evacuation assets, and we've got to gain control of that situation somehow. And that how is by creating that CCP and knowing what's going on. So the problem is people hear this and now think, wow, CCPs are bad. What should we do now? Let's let casualties stay wherever they are and have a completely unorganized treatment and evacuation setup. If we need to, we can just keep calling litter teams in. That's brilliant. No, it's not. It's not at all. Sometimes big physics words are complicated. And so the use of inertia is actually, he probably should use entropy. So, before he thinks about CCPs, probably should go back to a physics book and just read definitions of things and understand that. But my point, and probably why I'm going on about this, is this has gained a little bit of traction. So you do have groups of people that have heard this nonsense. They're like, oh, yeah, CCPs are unneeded. They actually are worse for the patients because they delay. No, you start a CCP because you are behind the 8 ball. You've got to get your head up. You got to see what you got. It's dynamic. It's constantly changing. Those 3 people you have, potentially you're going to have, as soon as they get into the room down the hallway, you may have 10 more. So whoever's rolling with that amount of evacuation assets that tight and close, I mean, you are the anomaly, and I can tell you that doesn't actually exist. Yeah, so don't fall in that. Understand CCPs, understand what they are. Don't listen to nonsense. So in the end, course of action, capability development. Base those things on taking a military term, the MET, your mission, enemy, terrain, troops, and time available. Do not settle for typical off-the-shelf solutions. Develop your key performance parameters for each skill set and train with a primary, alternate, contingency, emergency mindset. Work that up and down that spectrum to find and search. Constantly look for every possible failure point of your plan. That way you can at least identify it before it happens. So if it happens in that incident, tomorrow morning, it's not sucker punching you, right? You're like, hey, listen, we knew this may come up. Let's just move on. Let's get this thing going. Come up with solutions on the fly. Hopefully, you're going to be able to identify those and come up with kind of a pace methodology that everybody's on that same game plan. And develop and construct a flexible authority-having jurisdiction as far as any of the rescue stuff out there. And that's probably more aimed at the fire department, rescue task force type thing. But understand, when we're looking at your authority-having jurisdiction, they can dictate. You don't have to follow 1983 at all during this event. We've talked about this a bunch. We got a podcast on NFPA 1006 where it kind of really goes into what those guidelines say and why 1983 specifically is definitely not even in the picture on an event like this. And 1983 guys will tell you the exact same thing. Even in their scope, which normally we pass over, and I want to say it's like it's 1.1.6 now, I think was 1.1.5, that says, hey, if you're doing something outside this with additional hazards, doing something outside of a regular technical rescue that has other hazards like mountain rescue, cave rescue, or anything with additional hazards, don't use our guidelines. Right? Because you're not going to want to bring half-inch rope on this thing. You're not going to want to bring steel NFPG-rated carabiners on this thing. You had a 7.5 rope airmed that's rated at 5,500 plus minimum brake strength with a 23 kilonewton carabiners. Yeah, you're good, man. You're sitting really good. So a flexible authority having jurisdiction, understanding that you need to be able to dynamically expand or contract based on what your mission profile is key. That concludes part 2. We will be posting part 3 here soon. If you have any questions, hit us up on email.